We have building a registry, how to overcome digital twin adoption. It's pretty interesting. I was pretty impressed to see what this group developed, some of the solutions that they discussed on this topic, and to see how digital twin and the ideologies behind it can really help our industry, both from the design side to the construction to the owner and maintenance portion. So, Kelly?
Appreciate the handoff, Dan. So as usual, we had a very complex conversation that went literally right up to the last 3 seconds. I think we were mid-sentence when when we lost the feed. Really, the foundation of all this was we're weaving in topics from other conversations, and this one was around the universal unique ID, and it's actually a group that's broken out from the main group and done some stuff on the side. Now we wove it back into the main conversation, and then it'll go back out to the group again. It's that important of a topic, and this unique ID is really important to tie to a site or a project at the beginning of that project, because it has the ability to be the needle that pulls the golden thread of data through these projects, through these aggregation of projects on sites that feed the digital twin. So there really is a link between those two things, and we've discussed the golden thread for the digital twin at length in our group. We learned that there's just a ton of effort to put something like this together, and we had a good example to learn from, and then that's in the solar industry. So Tom from SunSpec, his organization took on the challenge of bringing all this together. We had Jan with Blu Banyan, who helped pull it all together from a technical perspective to build the orange button that allows these things to communicate easily and universally with each other. And then we talked to Dixon about understanding the downstream benefits of bringing all these elements together, and how it's affecting a project that they're working on right now, where they're looking to do financing for solar at the grid scale. Right. In order to get all those elements together, you really have to have things tied together and woven quite nicely from a technical perspective, and bring all those elements in. And there's a lot of effort to get there, but the target was to reduce costs within the solar industry. An example that Tom gave us was a $100 million contractor. By using these efforts that are tied together with the orange button, they are able to save $300,000 a year by having accurate information about authorities having jurisdiction. They were doing an hour per project across every project that they did. And then when they aggregated all that, there was actual real tangible savings there. Now, it was interesting. I asked some questions. How do you get the carrot out there? How do you get the stick, the candy, the wrapper? We've got all these different analogies we're going to use. And it was a really interesting concept, two really that came out of it. One is you need to have funding large enough to fund a registry like this to have appeal. The data source, the folks that are going to aggregate this together, or the technology that's going to aggregate it together, needs to have credibility. But then you also need to be this balance between patient and impatient. You need to be impatient enough to want it right now. I got to fix my problem now, but you also have to be patient enough to take the time to do it. So what they really were able to do is bring together a large number of organizations to defer and delegate and spread that patience, and then spread that funding out over multiple organizations, and that really helped. And one of the folks, Jeff, brought up on the call, doing something like this actually creates opportunities for new business models. And I know it's everybody's favorite topic, but you know those calls you get at all the wrong hours about your car vehicle's warranty that's getting ready to expire? That is all made possible. That annoying business opportunity has been made possible by the VIN number on your vehicle, and this universal number that these organizations can pull down and then extrapolate information about the age of your vehicle, what kind of warranty you may have, and when it might expire, so that they can get in touch with you to annoy you. Well, that is made possible by the registration of this universal ID. So there's plenty of examples that we can explore within our industry that gives us downstream additional business opportunities to leverage authorities having jurisdiction, knowing what that is, so they can give you permit information before you have to ask them, because they know based upon your type of project what you're going to need. Just lots of opportunities here. So looking forward to continuing this conversation in our working group. Today, we're going to be talking about building a registry and applying the CDX use case to it so we can see what's involved here. We have a few subject matter expert participants with us today. Jan, if you'll go ahead and start off and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
I am Jan Rippingale. I'm the CEO of Blu Banyan, and we are a software company that's building software for solar installers. And the friction in the industry, removing that friction, removing those soft costs is our mission. And according to my calculations, which I have yet to vet with some of the PhDs I know, but according to my calculations, simply removing soft costs and improving those process, improving that friction would improve solar installations pace enough that it would be a breakthrough technology as defined by Bill Gates, where you're removing 500 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere for the planet every year if this technology were deployed at scale. So in case anyone is excited about the impact that all of this geekiness can have, it can be real.
Perfect.
But
Thank you, Jen. All right, Tom, how about you?
Hey there, my name's Tom Tansy, and I run an organization called the SunSpec Alliance. And we are a nonprofit and a standards developer, and specifically building information and communication standards for distributed energy industry. We work with Jan's company and many others on this endeavor. And what I'll be talking about today is the underlying standard behind this registry application called the Orange Button. And so this is any application data exchange technology for the solar and energy storage industries. It's closely tied together with other machine related standards that we work with to actually control and drive the actual machinery that would constitute a solar energy plant. But we're firm believers in the power of information standardization for driving industries to scale. And so that was our intention at the outset. And so I'm very pleased and honored to be able to work with organizations like Blu Banyan, of course, Surety, Resource Connection, and Wells Fargo to make this all a reality.
Excellent. Thank you. Dixon.
Yeah, Dixon Wright. I'm with USI Insurance Services, and we specialize in surety bonds in the construction space. And we see the energy space having a lot of construction activity. And I've been active in the Orange Button to see if we couldn't have the emerging standards in the energy space align with the efforts in the construction space for open standards so that we can bring in contract surety underwriting into the data flow.
Excellent. All right. So what are we here to talk about today? We always start these sessions framing the discussion. So how might we overcome current digital twin adoption barriers in ways that we can take lessons from existing data registry initiatives so that the idea of a universal project registry can become a reality? I'm going to show you a couple more slides to kind of set that up, what it is we're talking about, and then that will facilitate some conversations and introductions from Jan and Tom and Dixon on how they put this stuff into play. And if we look at the diagram up here, this is the example we were showing. It was just an X, and this X moves across the line, and all these other things as that X, that object, that project, what have you, moves across the line, you're picking up other things as it moves along, and these things could be anything. So that's why I'm being a bit abstract there. but they have specifics to do with design and build and operate and the owner and the insurance and the maintenance, and all these different things are happening. And this all ties into the digital twin, because the digital twin is that digital representation of what happened. It's cataloging all the steps along the way. It's cataloging that information to make sure it flows, and it's building relationships. So within this context, what we're saying, we're defining the X as a universal ID. Okay, so that's something that at the beginning of the project, any project, we establish this universal identifier. So that way, as it moves along the line, right, it's going to pick up these other attributes as it goes, but it's all going to be related to a single ID. Now, for some objects, that's going to be a GUID. For some objects, that's going to be an output to the IWMS or to a CMMS, and these are attributes and that we need to associate with that universal ID. So that way, think of it in the other discussions we've had around a digital thread. Okay, you can't push a thread across a table. You just can't do it, right? But if you take that thread and you thread it through the needle and then you pull the needle, the thread will come behind you. So think about this X right here as a needle. These are all individual threads that come together that tie to that universal ID. So now we have a way to pull together all this tapestry of threads that make up a build project to create that golden thread that flows through the project. So now what we want to look at is what will it take to take an existing sources of data and pull this information together to make a registry. In the downstream conversation we're having, that's the universal ID. In this case, we're going to use what these folks were able to accomplish in the solar industry by looking at that model and understanding what's there. So Jan, perhaps you can kind of set the stage here to understand what's involved, the kind of things that we're working with. I think you have an example of the city of Houston in a very easily understandable graphical picture that you can share as well to kind of show why. So I'll turn it over to you here for a minute.
So the AHJ registry is solving a very specific problem. The AHJs in the United States suffer from a bit of politics, fundamentally. And so when you are deciding whether or not you want to get a permit and who your permitting agency is, you need to know which AHJ you're in. Okay, so the red is the city of Houston, and it is currently the AHJ of the city of Houston, right? And Harris County is this one. And as you can see, if you look over here on the building codes, the fire code makes a really big difference for how the offsets work when you're installing solar, like how much offset you need on your roof. And so the city of Houston has got the 2012, but Harris County's got 2018. So you have to know whether you're in the city or the county in order to know how to design that system. And as you can tell, when you come down and look at this, the same street is in city of Houston on this side, Harris County in the middle, and the city of Houston on the other side. So it is very difficult to know exactly which ones you're at. So the AHJ registry is literally just a database of AHJs, but we added a feature to it, which is this polygon mapping. So when you enter any address of your home address, and we can try it with my home address, you can actually see which AHJ you have. This is my home address, and this is my not nearly as crazy, but still a little bit crazy AHJ locally. And by showing people, by being able to deliver that we not only have the database, but the only reason that people are accessing this database is because they don't have to decide which AHJ they're in. They could just ask the computer, it does polygon crazy math, that's a thing, and comes back and tells them the answer. So it simplified it all for them. And this is all tied together with a UUID that is assigned by the central registry for each AHJ, so we know exactly what we're talking about. But the reason that we got everybody to use it is because we solved this problem of them not being able to tell, being mere mortals versus computer maniacs, which AHJ their address was in. So this is the problem that we're solving. We needed a registry, and the solution required that we provide enough candy, that we provide enough of a benefit that everybody wanted to register and utilize it upfront. The data sources that this came from included the Census Bureau, which maintains regular polygon information about every AHJ and updates it every year. NREL, which had done some initial tying together of which AHJs are in which addresses and kind of basic information about that AHJ. And then crowdsourcing. We got a lot of the building codes and the URLs just from people entering the data based on what they could find online and with personal contacts and sources and that kind of thing. So those are the three sources of data and the problem that we're solving.
Well, that kind of sets the stage. That gives everybody the visual to understand the what and the why. Tom, perhaps you can kind of describe what was involved there. I mean, you guys
Sure.
have kind of pulled the pieces together.
Yeah, I suppose I represent the how part of the equation, right? So how do you tie all these disparate information sources together? So for background, the SunSpec Alliance, we got started more than a decade ago, back in 2009, to standardize all the information associated with solar and distributed energy that we could. And why is that? Again, it was dealing with this soft cost issue that Jan mentioned. So when somebody goes to install a solar energy or a solar plus battery system, roughly a third of that money that they would spend in the United States goes to these so-called soft costs. And that includes everything from the financing to the permitting and the inspection, et cetera. And so of the complaints that we hear from practitioners around the country, so-called PII, which is not personally identifiable information, but permitting, installation, and inspection costs are really sort of near and dearest to the installer's hearts. And so this then becomes a target for information standardization because, of course, you know, the soft costs are built up from people doing transactions surrounding this project. So you talked about, you know, tying back to your thread. So bringing together all the information about the project is really critical. And so at the risk of losing my thread, so back to SunSpec and what our participation here is that we took on the endeavor of standardizing all the information from the machine level up. And we felt that if we could reduce friction in every part of the system, that we could then drive down soft costs. So we started pioneering in these machine-to-machine specs. And so SunSpec Modbus is now an interface that you'll find on a solar inverter, for example. That happened in 2020. At the same time, we were working on these different application and financing interchange mechanisms as well. And so this is where the orange button came into play. And again, as I mentioned, soft costs include financing. So we worked with the DOE, we convinced them to invest in our project so that we could make a data interchange standard to attack the high cost of solar finance by, again, normalizing all the information that goes into that sort of a transaction. And so, and that would include people's, you know, credit histories, information about the site, information about the equipment, et cetera. And then after the investment is made in that, then how does the thing operate, right? How is it still harvesting solar energy, and is it operating as efficiently as what the investment case was made? And so you need information to do all that stuff. And so that was the scope of Orange Button, is to standardize all the information in around that area. So as time has gone on, we've looked for anchor sort of applications that would really spark people's imaginations. And as Jan mentioned, And this is unlike to, I think, other parts of the construction industry. For an electrical contractor, it's really difficult to determine who can say yes or who can say no to you. You think that this would be easy. This is construction. You just go down to where you pull your building permit and you're all done. It turns out that because of this is a new technology and it involves different building codes, then you have all this lack of clarity about what page for this street location at this particular point in time. And so again, we solicited DOE. DOE was kind enough to allow us to invest $4 million of their dollars. We paired it with $4 million from industry to build out this taxonomy that then allows things like the authority having jurisdiction registry, AHJ registry, to come into being. So that's a little bit of the history. We're now supporting the project now. So as part of building information standards, you have to build prototype models. And so this is what we've done here. And the AHJ registry is an extension beyond that to actually show an existence proof of what can the investment be like if we can bring one of these things to life, and what kind of impact can it have.
That's great information. Dixon, what I thought you may be able to bring to the conversation here is, can you help us understand how that impacts your world and the correlation to the greater construction environment, and then maybe some of the work that you're doing with the DOE to bring this and extend it even further.
Yeah, and I would expand on the term financing, because obviously financing is the #1 target, because whoever's financing it generally can set the rules and say, this is what I want in order to get my financing. What I would suggest is that financing is really extended beyond just the bankers, but also the insurance carriers, the surety underwriters. Anybody that's got a financial stake in the game is looking for the information as well for their own underwriting, for their own participation, wherever they are along the ecosystem. So, where I play on the surety side, but also on the insurance side. So the AHJ registry is a precursor to getting the permit. And the permit has a whole bunch of data, and Jan and Tom have done an incredible job on another project called Solar App that is the permit data. And I can use the permit data for insurance purposes, for writing the contracts, writing surety bonds. So instead of recreating the wheel as the timeline, as you said, the thread goes down the project, I don't need to start fresh when I'm the 4th person in the line. I can take the information that the people have developed earlier and use it for insurance and surety underwriting without making them recreate the wheel or give me different information in a different format. And so what we're doing with the orange button is trying to bring the building of the grid, which is now being privatized, into the standards world, in the world of finance, insurance, and surety. So surety bonds for decommissioning and surety bonds for interconnection or power purchase agreements is an example of where I'm working. On the insurance side, we have performance guarantees, obviously the builder's risk and all the rest on the insurance side. So there's a lot of overlap with the work that we're doing, but we're receiving the information. And so building it, that Tom talked about, the how it got here, is critical. And Tom and Jan have done an incredible job of creating a resource so that the next generation could tap that resource.
That's great information. What I see here visually, and this is something that we put together based upon our pre-conversations, is you have sources of information, right? Starting over here on the left-hand side, that come together by nature of the orange button, right? That's that connectivity, that universality that brings the information together to feed the AHJ registry, which then Blu Banyan can use for other items like inspection reports. And because you can pull information from here and pull it into the inspection reports, well, then that also helps with the solar app. So this question of who else can benefit from downstream is important. Can somebody just walk the team through real quickly how someone would use this solar app and then take advantage of all the information that it is pulling downstream?
So I can do that. The AHJ registry, because it's got that UUID, so Solar Success as a tool just gives an address, like a lead address, right? And then we've got the AHJ ID. And because we know that, then we're able to work with the solar app permitting agency, and we both have a common set of building codes that they're expected to use. We know exactly which AHJ it is. Harris is not an especially descriptive name for Harris County. So across the US, by name alone is not actually clear. We need that UUID to make sure that we're talking about exactly the same thing, and we have the same parameters around it, the same descriptors of which fire code and building code apply, for instance. And so we're both using the registry. It's almost like the registry is above us, and then Solar Success is using it, and then we just use it to talk to Solar App. Once we know the AHJ ID, we can send that to Solar App. We can send it to inspection software and inspection checklists. We can send it in different places, and everybody knows exactly which AHJ ID we're talking about, because we all have this common reference point.
So there's a lot going on there, but it's a means to an end, right? And it's an end that each one of you is participating in and is necessary to help streamline and deploy solar at scale. So I think what we're doing here is providing a good use case to say, why do we need to look at this in the more general construction industry? But it's not without effort. So can you give us some background on some of the challenges that you had to overcome to help get to where you did with this project?
Sure, absolutely. I'll go first on this one. So, see, yeah, there's a lot going on here, but there's a reason why there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of money at stake. This is measured in billions of dollars every year. As a construction sector, the U.S. solar industry alone is about a $200 billion a year endeavor. So if you assume that soft costs consume probably not overall 1/3 of the total cost, because utility scale is going to be less expensive, but even 20%, right? You chip away 1-2%, pretty soon you're talking real money. So that's why we're working on these types of projects, and this technology is scalable across other types of construction. I mean, eventually, essentially commodities go into the built project, and you need to track it, you need to finance it, maintain it, et cetera. So all pretty basic stuff. And so if you can get to a common data set, then this is something that you really want to have here, because it can save you a lot of money. So what are the challenges? Well, developing a standard takes a long time. A wise man that I know once said that really to have it come to fruition maybe takes 10 years worth of effort. And so we've only been at this for maybe 6.5 years, right? So we're barely an infant. And what do you challenges as an infant phase? Well, you could get dropped on your head, you could die of a disease, et cetera. And so and this project has gone through some of those same challenges. We need to make sure that we haven't dropped it on its head, because these efforts are hard to fund, right? It's hard to get people invested. You have to have certain vision to want to go after it. And you need to tie that back to a very specific business case that allows you to justify that investment that you make. And so finding that compelling business case, that's probably the main challenge, I would say, overall. Now, fortunately, with this authority having jurisdiction registry, we found at least one customer, a mid-sized construction firm. I think they do maybe $100 million a year in total construction. They claim that they can save about $300,000 a year by having accurate lookup of authority having jurisdiction information. They estimate that they had previously been spending an hour per project trying to determine this information and capture it. And we're able to provide that for a small fraction of the cost, around about 1%. And so if you say that, you can extrapolate that over the rest of the industry. So, but that just gives you the sort of the picture about what's at stake here. But the main problems that you have are the typical ones. How do you get people interested to stay the course and build on those incremental wins that we have with customers in order to change the business?
Well, a funding model is key for all of this. And then getting enough you have to have enough appeal that you attract people into to work with it. Then you have to have enough credibility that they want to work with the data, and that the crowdsource has the credit, that the crowdsourced data then can get verified so that it's got that credibility. And then you have to have people who actually use it and adopt it and are patient enough. They have to be at the right degree of impatient, that they want the change and they want to see the benefit, and yet patient enough for it to go through a standardized process that everyone agrees to in order to move it forward. So there's like 4 or 5 different factors that need to get balanced to successfully make this work, in my experience so far.
Yeah, I want to add one other thing. So when we received the orange button, what I call orange button 1 funding, which would have been down beginning of 2016, we, as I said, it was $4 million of federal funding. We had to back it up with $4 million of in-kind contributions. And so this is instrumental to the success. So 4 million in-kind contributions, this means people's paycheck that was at least partially attributed to spending time on this project. So we got over 600 different companies, banks, construction firms, engineering firms, manufacturer, and so forth, to dedicate that kind of effort to build up this taxonomy and this database. And so that sort of a strong boost out of the gate has allowed us to sustain it as we've gotten into more and more specific use cases with more and more exacting taskmasters in terms of delivering that return on investment.
All important information. I'd like, Dixon, your thoughts on, you're trying to leverage Orange Button at scale. You're talking with folks in the government about how you can leverage it for things that you're working on. There's got to be some friction there as well that you're encountering, and how you're dealing with that.
Yeah, the privatization of the grid is new. So most of the characters that I work with in the insurance and the surety world are used to very traditional models. And this is not a model that they're used to. And so you're asking them to take in underwriting information that they haven't traditionally taken in. And on top of that, of course, anytime you talk to anybody in the insurance or surety world and say, can you modify your system to receive a data? If they go to their IT department, inevitably it's this long period and a huge budget. And if you don't have the revenue flow to support it, they're going to tell you to come back later. So, you know, you have to come in with everybody buying in order to show the cash flow for the insurance markets to go for it. But they won't buy in until the insurance companies provide the financial incentive in which to buy in. So we always fight the chicken or the egg. And the biggest challenge is consensus, you know, and to get people to break out of their silos. Because insurance is over here, surety is over here, and trying to get people to think across the ecosystem is a big challenge.
Important. Has there, and this is open to anybody, is there anything that helped folks feel like they had skin in the game, or is there something helping to facilitate that trust? Because our industry is fraught with folks who are like, hey, I'm not taking this risk now. We're a low margin business. I'm not going to use up any of my low margin to make the industry better. You guys figure it out. What was, as Jan has put it in the past, the candy inside the wrapper that got folks to pay attention?
Well, it's kind of an old school value, but I think which is kind of endemic to the construction industry. It's like, it's called showing up, right? And doing the job every day. And not backing down. So, I mean, yeah, yes, and of course we bring our wonderful, innovative minds to the task as well. But a lot of it is just really simply that. And so, yeah, in terms of what has helped in this regard, is we are able to show how individual construction companies and software companies can benefit. They can gain new customers, new revenue streams, new efficiencies. And of course, and then publicizing it. I think it was really important for us in terms of Orange Button is to align it with a Green Button, which is a related standard in terms of energy consumption. That's a national standard. There's also a Blue Button for healthcare. So that's helped, I think, helped us quite a bit with driving awareness for this, and then just staying at it. But I'd say that's the main thing. So I would say to our audience, if you are building software systems where you're exchanging construction data with other software systems that need to consume that same information, Orange Button or something like Orange Button is for you, because it can decrease the time it takes for you to integrate your systems. You can increase the value of the data, and back to that credibility, right? The consumer needs to experience that this data is correct first time and every time. And if they can do that, then it's an easy sell from that standpoint. Who wouldn't like that?
And to follow on Tom's point, where we've tried to be active is, Orange Button is dedicated for solar, and so its natural focus is solar. But I've tried to make it very generic for construction, because at the end of the day, a construction project for solar in the surety world is no different than a construction project for a school or a highway. You have a contract amount, you have a bill to date, paid to date, you have a progress. So we put in a lot of the generic terms for construction as a whole, instead of just stereotyping it for solar only.
And I have to say that we just snuck in Orange Button with the AHJ registry, like, the ground up vegetables in your smoothies with your fruit in them, right? So when you go to the AHJ, all they wanted was the candy. So they wanted this, fruity smoothie candy thing, because instead of paying $300,000 a year, they're paying $3,000 a year. And who doesn't want to save $297,000, right? So it was a super easy buy for them. And then the fact that the only API that was available was an Orange Button compliant API was just how we snuck in the vegetables in their sandwich for what it is that they needed to take away. We have all these meetings I'm on Pacific Coast, so I'm all food. So on Pacific time, but we did the Orange Button. It was actually the fact that these guys have Orange Button compliant API into the AHJ registry. For a whole bunch of them, they don't even really realize that there are vitamins in there. They just want to get their, good tasting AHJ data. Like, that's all they want.
Well, to paraphrase Jan, once they buy into a data interchange exchange format, then it turns out you can flow a lot more data across that same channel for other applications, having to do with whatever product components, people's credit scores, site conditions, whatever it might be. So, yeah, sorry, Jan. I know we're just having a little fun here.
Exactly.
It's all about facilitating the conversation, so it's all good. It's all good.
Right.
So what I want to do now is, we've just learned a lot of lessons about how we got to where we are within the solar industry. But now let's look at how we might look at putting the pieces together in the larger industry as a whole. So instead of an AHJ industry, the initial thing that we need to start any project is that universal ID. Where does it start? Who does it start with? So I'm going to open this up to the larger group to kind of give some feedback here and start answering some of these questions, right? Let's start on the left-hand side of the page here. What are the elements that we need to be associated with that project ID, that universal ID? It can apply to an entire site, because this is I have Paul putting in here, we should stay away from project, and that really is a good point, and that aligns with what Peter was saying right before that. Within a particular site, there could be multiple projects, and then within each project, there's multiple sub-projects. So it really kind of starts with what represents this spot on the earth that we are going to put some built asset, whether it's a solar panel or a bridge or a building. So what are some of these elements on the left-hand side of the screen? I would think, Paul, Peter, you guys probably have some thoughts around this so that we can start to gain some parity between the model that we've been looking at and how we can start to populate.
Yeah, there, you've got me thinking here, looking at this. And one question I had is I don't think that the registry has the APN number in there, right? I didn't see that, Jan. Is that in the owner information?
It is in the Orange Button information. If I could share for just a second.
Oh, okay. So you're pulling that then from data tree and then putting it into Orange Button?
Yes, we are.
Yeah,
That's
so Jen,
literally
go ahead
exactly
and
how we're doing that.
show us what we're talking about. But what I want to key on here is, while that's a good piece of information that must be included, it's kind of what ties things together. One thing that Jan mentioned earlier that I think is important to parallel is that information is coming from, the orange button is pulling together information from multiple sources. Now,
Right.
if the
Sure.
APN is the thing that helps tie things together at that point to help make the registry work, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jan, but I feel like that may be the direction you're heading here.
I think, can I just comment on that before you go to Jen for a second? I
Sure.
think part of it is to me, the reason the APN is so important and the owner information is for legal notices for the contract, right? That's where I'm coming from. So from a contract perspective, jurisdictions, all that stuff, the getting, perfecting my rights, so to speak, is the primary interest there. But the other thing it does is it provides owners who have portfolios of properties and whether it's e-builder or not, they have a hard time keeping track of all of these things, but they could do it very easily if they were all linked to an APN number somewhere. So that was kind of what drove me to think that's a key part of this.
Peter, and I can appreciate you trying to find, like, how do you start the conversation? How do you start the story? And that is one approach, and that's one storyline. That's almost down the road from why do you need the project to begin with, right? And that's where I think having that thread being pulled by a needle, the ideation of understanding why you need that capital asset in place or that piece of infrastructure or, a solar system. There's decisions made in pre-design that I think could really start this golden thread, Kelly, where, we're talking about the actual implementation side of things almost by getting into APNs, which I think is the right, approach on this. When we're taking a look at need, right, especially on like let's say a neighborhood scale, a campus scale, a neighborhood, a district, right? The urban planning piece of this, I think, needs to be almost in front, right? Where when we are talking with the, the different types of planning commissions, we're the reason why that's on the forefront of my mind. We're just dealing with the Abu Dhabi, planning commission, and that UPC group. They are going to be putting a lot of this information already in play as they start to either sell it out to developers or develop it themselves, right? Then the project gets involved. And to your point, Kelly, that, what's a project? Is it nested? And those types of things. So I think, with this group, it'd be really interesting to see where does the story start? Because then at that point, that one digital thread that you showed, Kelly, we could be pulling in things earlier, which because you don't want decisions to be made. And Dixon, you could probably, back up on this, about the project itself is important, but there's a lot of decisions made ahead of the time, especially in the financial world, where they're already making decisions and calling things out and making their own, Dewey Decimal System taxonomy thing, right? And then we have to redo it again. And the idea is, how can we get in front of this thing, and where does the story start? And I'd also say that, having talked with Chris Anderson at the AIA Contracts, they're taking a major pivot away from the idea of having PDF templates and you type in your AIA contracts that way. They are going full-blown blockchain. And they're doing smart contracts, and they're making this big announcement in a couple of weeks publicly. So shush, everybody.
Hallelujah.
What's that, Jeff?
Hallelujah.
Yeah, I know,
Get
right?
away from
Finally.
the PDFs with the fill in the blanks.
Fill in the blanks, exactly right. And what they're going after is time savings, Jeff, right? Because on the average, you get a large-scale architectural engineering firm, and how many hours do their people spend filling out those damn forms time and time again when we should be doing auto population? Just a very simple thing. But with those contracts, one of the things that we're challenging them is, are we looking at another classification of contracts after the instrument of service, which those contracts, be it EJ, CDC, or AIA contracts now, are up to a point where you are delivering a physical building. But with the emergence now of the digital asset, now all of a sudden, who owns the rights after that? because there's a life to those digital assets. It's not just put up into a cloud. It's not put onto a backup tape drive, and it's not just an as-built drawing. There's a parallel path here, I think, where this UUID becomes a very, very, very important piece. So again, where do you start it? Who then is the steward of that, as you're pulling that needle through? Because you can see all the different pieces as you showed. I thought that was a great graphic, Kelly. All those things now start to get pulled through. And so, I think from the digital side of things, where the contracts are going, where you're going to have ownership, almost like writing a hit song. Someone's going to have the publishing rights to the digital asset, as well as we need to then document, which is the whole discussion here. What's the documentation processes of delivering a physical building or a bridge or any of these built environment pieces?
So I want to throw a quick pause in. I think the UUID is the needle, right? We need to, within the context of this graphic, there's certain folks that are going to need to be involved. There's certain data points that we're going to need to engage. If somebody could have come to Jan and said, how do you build out this registry, or can you build this registry because you're my needle? And she'd be like, sure, I can do that. But what pieces of thread, or what pieces of what little rods of iron did she have to weave together to create the needle that you can now pull the thread? What are the sources of information that would need to be connected to the product registry? Where it starts with the owner, with the surety, with the financing, that is another point that we can argue. But if we don't have a UUID to push a button and create and then pull across the project, we don't have the starting point. And if we don't have the 3 or 4 or 5 pieces of input that would need to come together to have that registry function when somebody pushes the button, well, then we're right back in the same spot. So does anybody have perspective on those elements that come together to create the registry? Because that's all the work that Tom and Jan put into place. Jan, you look like you have a thought there.
Well, so I've been thinking about this since we talked last week about what is the candy, right? Like, what are you going to do here that'll make this worthwhile? And so that people can, the UUID is necessary, all these things, and they're good vegetables, like you need to have them. But what is it that's going to attract people? And I was thinking about, if you had a UUID and if you registered your project here, then you could bid. Like, it could become a bid forum, and you could have quality stuff around how you're bidding for work, kind of like the Airbnb version. I'm sure they've got 1,000 different sites that are like this. But if you could hook up into different sites where you registered and people had a steady source of work, and then the builders would get lower cost jobs or something like that, you need to have something that will make people want to, that's going to save them money. And the fact that it's on solid technology and it's got a UID and it's setting the standard for the industry is all nice, and everybody wants to eat vegetables, but the only reason they're choosing to eat the vegetables is because we put a lot of chocolate around it. So how are we going to get the my analogy has some flaws, but how are we going to get the how do we get people to want to register their projects here
at whatever point they do, right? Whether that's
and
very
hopefully
early or
early as possible, right? But how do we get them to even try ever, right? Like,
I would argue that the establishment of a universally unique identification registry is a secondary issue to getting standardized information flow to begin with. Let's take the case of the authority having jurisdiction. So yes, we built this taxonomy based upon the information that we knew about our installer customers and what they needed to do their job, what piece of data they need. And so then what this AHJ registry did is that we've organized this information that they want in a standardized format, and we allow that data to come flowing back to them. Now they've got it and they can capture it. They could put it into their own database. Okay, so you repeat that same process across these different little sub applications, whatever it's, construction bidding, for example, or um, orders of completion, verification, whatever it may be. If you can start recording these transactions using a standardized data encoding scheme, then you end up with all the different users of these applications having standardized data that can then be used to construct this overall digital record. And then ultimately you can tie it together. You tie that record together with the universally unique ID. I think that's, I think ultimately that is an important thing to do, but I would argue that the more important job is just to start using data interchange standards so that you can lower the cost of connecting A to B and making that information flow as accurately and smoothly as you can. If you can do that, there's a natural impetus then to tie all that information together in a single record that you can identify uniquely on the planet.
So Thomas, I'm gonna challenge you on that a bit, and I think part of that comes from our experience at Building Smart, and one of the things recognizing that you'll never have one standard to rule them all, and so one of the things that we're working on is this idea of the data dictionary. And one of the things that we'll probably end up leveraging the data dictionary, which most of computing already has, this idea of linked data standards, via a JSON linked data standard. So, with the Building Smart Data Dictionary, we could host an innumerable amount of dictionaries, content, classification systems, whatever you want to call them. And then you have the ability to cross map between those systems to get out whatever it is that you want to get out, right? So then these idea of standard schemas, I think we go back to this idea of, well, fine, if Microsoft and others want to develop a digital twin description language, that's great. Well, we can actually develop a mapping between that and say IFC. So if somebody wanted to get the data from a database that's in DDTL and take it into a project that's using an IFC, you can write the JSON transformation rules, and boom, it happens. And then you don't have to worry about the schema so much. And it can happen quickly. And so to me, the key thing then is reversing what you said, is that, the UUID is everything, because what you need is a key. You need a key that ties everything. And so once you have a key, then what you connect to is innumerable, right? I mean, it's infinite. But the only way that's possible is to say, well, this is the identification, this is the uniqueness of this thing. It's like, it's like your genetic DNA. Somebody can say, hey, we know this is you. It doesn't matter what context we put you in, doesn't matter what place in the world you're in, this is you.
Interesting. Well, I would say, based upon your description, the industry that you work in has different characteristics from the solar and energy industry, which is all brand new. So yeah, sure, we have myriad standards that we can also work with, covering every use case. But for whatever reason, they weren't precise enough for us. But it sounds like, maybe in the general construction world, maybe it's further along, and maybe this UUID concept is the thing. Could well be. So to me, that's a high class. Getting to a universally unique ID for all these projects, that's a high class problem to solve. The problems that we tend to solve are far more fundamental, like what is a watt, what is a volt, what is a meter, right? What are these basic terms of art are the sort of the elements that we tend to focus in on.
Kelly, one of the things, and thanks for that, Tom, because you're right. The complexity issue is something that is always been a head scratcher, right? Because of the vastness of what we try and do every day, right? And one of the things that came up, and Jeff, I know that you and I went back and forth on this, was this idea of a distributed ledger, to
Mhm.
be something that could be at least a sandbox approach. And when we do that, what we're really talking about is discovering the ontologies that would tie together systems,
Mhm.
right? Because we're talking about taxonomy, right? And there's a taxonomy and a set structure in the solar world. There's a semblance in the digital world of what we deal with IFCs and whatnot. We have CSI master format, which I think 3 of us use in the entire universe, but it's there.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, there are many different ways to understand that DNA thread, right? And by decoding it and coming back, by taking a look at a decentralized system, we're now solving a couple of issues about a registry, Kelly, right? And one of those is the governance. You're expecting people to sign into a UUID when they've never done it before. Good luck with that. And I love Jan's approach, which is, well, let's give them some candy and hopefully they'll do it. But if you don't have to do it, you're not going to do it unless you really see the benefit. And
Carrot stick, right?
yeah. And so, I mean, that's really the dilemma that we're in right now. But I'm thinking that the decentralized approach, I think we have some lessons learned there that we still need to discover. This DLT stuff is just fascinating to me because of the way that it can work. And we're not getting into, Jeff's world, which, God bless you, Jeffrey. It's, trying to have people understand, number one, that standards are good for them. Jan's whole thing about, eat your broccoli. Damn, if we could get just the needle move just a little bit, it would help this discussion a lot better, rather than us, going back into our little silos and, you got
Mhm.
solar here and we got this here and we got infrastructure there.
Well,
One of the
and
things,
but go ahead, Jan.
I was just reflecting on this kind of deal that Dixon and I are working on, and the technology, the construction, the builder pretty much does not care at all about how the job gets done. And the fact that it's innovative and it's good and it's all that stuff, since I am kind of their technology partner, I am responsible for all vegetables, and they're just getting it all done. And I wonder who we should be marketing to, right? So the AHJ registry was easy to market to them because they're paying hard wages to get that information. But I wonder if the market here isn't more of the technology people. Every single one of those projects has a registered site ID
Mhm.
and it's got the APN. And they have eaten their vegetables, even though they don't know that. They literally have no idea other than just kind of presuming vegetables are handled. They don't have a clue. But we are setting up the ID. We've got UUIDs and we're transferring it to different software partners based on that. Like, we are working it.
Yeah.
And they're clueless. So I'm wondering, maybe owners aren't actually our audience. Maybe we should be talking about software people. And if you registered your IDs in this system, then you've got the ability to interface with 20 more partners than you had before.
That's
Yeah,
a,
right.
that's a key thing you just said, because they
Yeah.
register the project once and then they'll never have to register it again and they can work with any partner. And I think that's a huge benefit for the software companies.
And
And
the other
that's-
thing, we talked about in the prep call last week, I said, it's not just about sort of fixing the systems and people and partners that are in place now, but it's also offering possible other business opportunities for other people to take advantage of the system. So, I brought up the example of car warranty cold calls, right?
Everybody's favorite, Jeff.
Everybody's favorite. It doesn't matter how many times you yell at them over the phone to take me off your damn call list, you still get the call, days or weeks later. But the thing is it goes all the way back to the vehicle VIN, right? And every vehicle has a VIN number, and that VIN number is registered by the auto manufacturer, and basic data about the car is in there. And these product warranty or these car warranty extension places, they're able to pick up that data and say, okay, well, how many cars of a certain age are there out there There are certain types, so we know their warranty is limited to whatever, their factory warranty is limited to whatever. And now we're going to go call the people and find out if they want to extend their warranty for X amount of dollars. Now, I'm not saying that is necessarily a great service.
But it's a new business.
But it's a new business model,
technology.
right?
Yeah.
It's a business model based on this idea of an identification of an asset that can be extended to other purposes and other business opportunities. So, you know, we talked about this a little bit, and like the bidding thing is kind of interesting too, because if you're trying to get the best price of anything, you know, do you know whether or not you're really getting the best price from the best possible suppliers for a particular job and a particular type of project? And if you were to expand that at a larger regional, national, or even global scale, what might the opportunities be? And then, you know, you look at things like more and more the push to do life cycle cost analysis and drive into this idea that part of the bidding process should also include the carbon cost of the things that you're supplying. So then you begin to have people that can say, oh, well, I'm going to look for projects within a certain regional area because my plants and my suppliers are within X amount of distance of the particular region. And I know then I have the ability to, you know, provide a high value product to meet the high standard LCA goals that you know, particular project or jurisdiction might have. And how do you identify those things? Well, the only way to identify those things is that you know they exist, and the only way you know they exist is that they have to be identified somewhere, you know, in a way that's accessible. Right.
I'll give you a direct example of, you know, of a new business being opened up with actually the prototype implementation of an orange button application for something called Solar Access to Public Capital. This is a 2013 project from the Department of Energy. And what they're looking to do at that point is open up secondary financing for solar projects. In other words, Solar City, Sunrun, Vivint, they're out selling one rooftop at a time. Pretty soon, each one of them's got a portfolio of 100,000 systems apiece, right? That they're sitting on they've leased them or loaned them out. So they're sitting on a 10, 15, 20-year payment stream. They wanted to turn that payment stream into capital. So what do they need to do that? They have to have uniform information about each one of those projects. So in exactly the same way we're providing uniform information about authorities having jurisdiction. We did that for a project. And by the way, we assigned a universally unique ID at the time so that any rating agency, any investment firm would be able to evaluate those projects and know what they're talking about, the one on, you know, number 1 Main Street of whatever the city it is, and what its characteristics were, so that every rating agency, every bank, every financier could then name their price about what they could do about that. And so that opened up in the first year of operation, it opened up about $500 million worth of secondary financings. Second year around, it was, you know, 1.5 billion, and it's just grown from there in renewable energy. So you're exactly right. It's that ability to enable some other business to come in and do some greater thing. Take
some value added work. Yeah, somewhere along the food chain, there's a value to add.
Right.
So I would suggest that is the option to take. Is you have to explore multiple options. And so if we have authorities having jurisdiction buying in, then you explore the option of, well, if an owner also uses this and ties to the authority having jurisdiction when they put their information in, then they get a list of, well, what permits are required. And if they put in the building type, then they know if they need an air pollution permit. And so we've given some incentive to the owners. We give some incentives to the architects and engineers, same sort of thing. What information can they get? And like you said, if you open it up to where, hey, this is a universally unique identifier that can be used for bidding as well. And then you start to see who bites, because when you do something new, you're going to get 10 to 15% of the people out there that are going to do it because it is new and because they want to try something different. And you're going to have another 30% that will follow them when they say, hey, this works. And then you've got another 30% that's going to be years down the road. They're going to do it when we make them. And then the 15% that we have to ignore because they're going to cuss us every way back and forth just because it's new. And so we've got to open those doors up to multiple options. And so our next step, I would suggest, is, okay, we have a universally unique identifier that is being created when the authority having jurisdiction is pushing the orange button. Is that a correct repeat of what's happening?
That's one way in which it can get started, right? It could also start at a sales contract for a project as well. So,
Or it could
Like when
start
the
as a
architect
Starts at a
design.
lead,
Yeah.
right? You're doing a proposal for them.
or a lead, yeah.
Yeah, or in the larger commercial world too, it may be that when the design has started, either with the developer in some type of pre-design context, or with the architect that they may be working with in that pre-design context, might be starting the project in that way. And so, I'll throw out an example, an application like TestFit.io, right? And what's the other one that's Arkham Mathematics or something like that, where they are prototyping solutions to quickly prototype the development of a piece of property, multi-unit developments. And you can have all kinds of mixes of uses and everything on it. Well, as Peter was saying, what Peter was kind of sort of driving this conversation to begin with is, well, what if instead of me having to worry about, well, who am I going to connect to next and what files do I have to give them, all that, if you had this UUID registry, then somewhere along the line, people given they have given access to it, can pick up these identifications and then begin to tie the data together through whatever means they need to, whether it's a direct file exchange, it's a JSON exchange, whatever that may be, whether it's tying into somebody's CDE that is, the sort of the center of the project data. And then, as we were saying before, then you begin to connect into other people's systems like the surety and the lending side, where they say, okay, well, we need to know information about the project. Where do I find the information? Well, if I give you the UUID, then you can at least search for it, and then you can ask for access to things and ask for access to the information that you need.
So tying to the authority having jurisdiction also gives you uniformity, and it's a very good chance of being a real project at that point. Anything prior than authority having jurisdiction, you're going to get so many ghosts. If we go out there every time someone bids something or a developer thinks they're going to do something, you will quadruple the number and they'll all be ghosts. This project was put out there, but it's not real. It's never going to be real. And so,
I mean, that's sort of okay. I mean, if people are willing to deal with ghosts in the system, that's fine. I think the other thing to realize is that a UUID is truly unique, so you never have to worry about running out of numbers.
Yeah, and I do think that that continuity is important, because if that lead does turn into a contract, then you would want to retain that same number. So I do think giving a number early as a lead and a lead status is correct. And if somebody else winds up getting that contract, they would run with a different UUID number, right, for that contract.
we're trying to sort through multiple projects from different people putting them in to figure out that they're the same project would be quite the challenge.
Well, you wouldn't, in other words, the person that, I think it all revolves really to me around the contract. So once it's a contract, it does involve insurance, it does involve, potentially lenders, finance, contractors, lead rights, all that stuff. So it's either a converted lead that becomes a contract and then is in the index on the property and the APN and stuff like that, or it's not. And so if you have 10 people have that lead or chasing a lead, but only one of them goes into a contract, then that's the one that's going to be on public record because it's escalated.
So contract with contractor, contract with design firm, contract with
It'd be anything. Yes. Any prime contract, whether it's a design contract or a construction contract, if it's directly with the owner, and then the subcontracts would be a link to the prime contract.
So the authority having jurisdiction already has the benefits of having teeth that makes you have to register. I don't know of anything that gives you teeth on a contract. I guess our surety.
Well, it's the candy. I think it's for the candy for the contractor, right?
Yep.
They
All right,
give
we're
validation.
down to 5 seconds, folks. So I wanted to take the time to say thank you. We've had a great discussion. See you.